Well, I'm going to spend some time talking about strategy. One way to think about marketing is that marketing is all about finding the best net present value projects or markets for the firm with appropriate adjustment for risk. Marketing is really about the future. Yeah, we sell things today. We're concerned with advertising, current products, we're concerned with distribution. But a lot of what we do in marketing is about finding opportunities for the future. In some organizations, marketing doesn't exist as a term. You'll sometimes find business development as the term. But the focus there is really on finding new opportunities, growth opportunities in the marketplace. But in order to do that, in order to find things that are useful in the future, you have to make some assumptions about revenues and costs. Revenues and costs today in the business, revenues and costs in the future. And you want to think about how to leverage what you already are doing, products, markets, relationships, in ways that help lower risk. Anytime you start adding new things, whether that's new products that are new to the market, new markets you haven't sold into before, forming new partnerships, maybe with a new supplier or new distribution outlet, you're dealing with higher risk. And so one strategy in firms looking for growth is to think in terms of how they can leverage what they already do well and therefore reduce risk. And most firms do a really poor job of thinking about what they already do well and how they can leverage that and sort of jump immediately to the really new things. That's a high-risk strategy. Maybe a high-return strategy, but it's also high risk. And if you're going to pursue a high-risk strategy, you should really command higher returns. All of you have heard about Michael Porter in your strategy class. Michael Porter has an interesting point of view, and he's been very successful in promoting that point of view. It's basically that you can set up all kinds of supply-side barriers to keep competitors at bay. And it's an interesting idea. The only problem is it doesn't really work. The only supply-side barriers that really work for any length of time are government-imposed barriers. Government creates monopolies. When it creates a monopoly, then there is a barrier, and it's enforced by the government. But in most cases, so-called barriers to competition are very short-term. Yes, you can get a patent for 20 years, and in some industries you might actually get a few years of protection. But studies of patents have repeatedly demonstrated that most patents only provide a year or two of protection before somebody finds another way to do the same thing, to deliver the same benefit. So yeah, you can get some short-term protection, but usually not very long-term. More often than not, what works in the marketplace is things that serve the market. It's the ability to deliver high quality, low price, good value that ultimately produces a winner. And the government has gone after numerous so-called monopolies and firms that engage in anti-competitive practices, only to find that within 10 or 20 years they aren't so competitive after all. They went after IBM. Within 10 years, IBM was really suffering. Not because the government went after them, it's just the markets changed around them. They were a powerful hardware company selling mainframe computers. And suddenly there were these things called PCs that were on everybody's desk, and they were playing catch up. Consumers will generally pay a premium for products that best match their requirements. Yeah, they'll pay for things that don't match their requirements if that's all they can get. But as soon as they can get what they want, that's what they'll buy in at a premium. And just to make my point, Michael Porter's consulting firm went bankrupt about 7 years ago. And the reason that's given for it is a failure to consider market demand and customer preferences. It was all about the supply side. Kind of an arrogant view of the world, actually. But he did have some useful things to say, most borrowed actually from marketing. Porter talks about 3 generic strategies, and I think you'll recognize these from what we've talked about in the class thus far. He talked about something called cost leadership. If you were the low-cost producer, low-cost service provider, and you pass that low cost on to your consumer, you can be successful. It's a low-cost strategy, a low-price strategy, and it works if you happen to have low costs. The problem with a low-cost strategy is there can only be one lowest cost producer, supplier in the marketplace. And if you're not the lowest priced, then you have to find some other way to compete other than price. I might also note, as I have earlier in the class, that competing on price, if that's your business model, is a really tough way to do business and to be successful. Because there's always somebody out there willing to reduce quality a little bit, reduce service a little bit, and reduce price. And so you're constantly fighting a price war. Not a lot of fun. But you can be successful. Walmart has done it very, very successfully. So there are examples of success. Alternatively, you might say, I'm not going to pay so much attention to being low priced. I'm going to take advantage of the fact that there are lots of different segments in the marketplace, much as in bikes. There are different segments that have different needs and wants. And they will pay to get those needs and wants met. And so what we'll do is to identify one or more segments and develop a specialty product for that segment. May not be the lowest price. In fact, for some segments, what they want, by definition, may be expensive. If you're in the hotel business, there are customers who want a lot of service, which creates an opportunity for a Ritz-Carlton or a Four Seasons. Not everybody's going to stay there, but there is a segment that will stay there. You can be very successful differentiating your product. Some companies can even go so far as to develop enough different products that they literally serve the whole or most of the entire market. Procter & Gamble does that. Why does Procter & Gamble have 21 brands of detergent? Because they think there are at least 21 different distinct market segments for detergent. Some of them are defined in terms of very narrow preferences, but people will pay a premium to get what they want. Marriott, the hotel company, has a whole portfolio. They own Ritz-Carlton now, but they own Fairfield, which is a long-term residential hotel. They own Courtyard by Marriott, which serves the budget the budget business traveler. They have the regular Marriott, which does a lot of convention business. They do the JW, which is more upscale, but not quite where Ritz-Carlton is. So they've actually developed a whole portfolio of different products, if you will, different hotels to serve different segments in the marketplace. And so they've used a differentiation strategy very successfully in order to cover the market. But they can't cover the market with one product. One hotel won't serve. You need multiples. And in some cases, for some smaller businesses, the strategy might be to focus in a laser-like fashion on just one segment in the marketplace. Porter would call this a focus strategy. So you might find a market that you have a set of unique capabilities to serve. The market will pay you for those, and you can be very successful serving that one market. A lot of family businesses do this. A lot of family businesses that want to remain family businesses identify a niche, an opportunity in the marketplace. They serve it very well, but they really don't want to expand beyond that, because expansion beyond that would perhaps take them out of a family business, and many businesses that are family owned want to stay in the family. It's hard to do that when you get really big, although there's some examples of successes. S.C. Johnson is a family business, still a family business today, and it's a big business, but the family is still very much in charge. Actually, the Fords are still very much involved in Ford Motor Company. But those are three sort of general, generic strategies. Be really low cost and pass that on to the marketplace. Differentiate and serve one segment really well, or differentiate with multiple products and serve multiple segments really well at a price premium. One of the problems that we run into is that many firms get stuck in the middle. When we look at profitability of firms, what we generally find is that firms that have an overall high market share, usually because they have multiple products in the marketplace, a Procter & Gamble, also tend to be high in profitability. And firms that have low share but have chosen to focus, they've identified a really narrow part of the market, a segment that they can serve well but charge a premium, those firms tend to be high in profitability. What we find is there are a lot of firms that really don't serve anyone particularly well. So as a result, their margins are not particularly high. So the term is they get stuck in the middle. Middling market share, low margins. There's some firms that are going out of business today that were stuck in the middle. Sears. Sears was neither Walmart nor Nordstrom's. It was kind of in the middle. Yeah, you can still go to Sears and get lots of product, but you didn't get a lot of service like you would at a Nordstrom. You didn't get a really low price as you would at Walmart. So they kind of were stuck in the middle, and they're disappearing. Now, we've been studying business strategy for about 120 years now. And we have learned some things that do seem to work generally in strategy. They don't always work because there's an issue of execution. You can have a great strategy and execute it poorly and it doesn't work. But in general, we know some things about what works, assuming that there's good execution. First of all, size does matter. Bigger does matter because you get economies of scale and economies of scope. In most businesses, larger businesses tend to have lower cost of production or service provision. And indeed, if they don't, there's a question about why. That might suggest an execution problem. Big businesses can be low-cost, low-price sellers. It's hard to be a low-cost, low-price seller unless you have size, because you have to get the economies of scale. We also know that having special access to materials or other resources, or access to markets, can be successful, particularly if you had things that are not easily copied. One of the things that makes a Disney successful is that all of its films are copyrighted. No one else can legally show those films. So it has protection. And for a lot of its family-oriented entertainment, every 7 years it reintroduces those films to another generation of children. A very successful strategy. And in some cases, if you have protection from competition, that can be successful as well. Patents, at least in the short term, copyrights again. Sometimes just uncertainty about whether you can reproduce what the competitor has done may be sufficient to give you a barrier. Sometimes disincentives for the customer to leave, barriers to customer exit can be ways of retaining customers. And there are a whole range of intangibles and network effects that may be involved. Again, with intangibles, there are economies of scale and scope. If I have a brand, I can expand that brand really easily. Unlike a tangible asset where I might, a tangible product where expansion might require that I build another production facility, create another distribution facility, hire more service personnel. With a brand, very often I can expand that very readily at low cost. What does it cost Facebook to expand? Not much. Maybe a few servers, but not much. So when we get into intangibles, there are real opportunities to really escalate the scale and scope of those in ways that's hard to do with tangibles. Brands are a good example. I can extend brands. There also tend to be real synergies that occur. Some of those synergies exist on the production side. Again, my Facebook example, it's really easy to expand on the production side because it doesn't cost very much. But there are also synergies on the demand side. Part of what makes a Facebook valuable is all the other people who are connected. Who would want to be on Facebook if they were the only person on Facebook? No. There's some value if there are a couple of people on Facebook. But the more people who become members and use Facebook, the more valuable it becomes. To use an older technology, think about the telephone. I always wonder, who was the first person to buy a telephone and why? If you're the only person with the telephone, what do you do with it? You need at least a second person with the phone before it has real value. So we call that a network effect. And the more people that get involved, the more valuable the product becomes. Even a product, an app like Waze, are any of you familiar with Waze? That actually becomes more valuable the more people are on it. Why? Why does Waze become more valuable? Yeah.
Like if people are on it, like if they see a cop, like they will report it. If they see like something.
Yeah, the more people who are a part of the network, the more valuable the information becomes because there's more information, there's more coverage, and so that's another app, another application, another product where you get a network effect. There are a variety of product and market strategies, and it's important when you think about strategies to not think in terms simply of products or markets, but product markets. Products that serve a particular market. You worked on those in bikes. In bikes, you had products for specific market segments. Each of those product combinations with market segments were in fact product markets. Differentiation is simply a way of identifying and creating product differences, but you want those product differences to be of value to some market segment. So you really want to put the notion of segmentation, how customers differ and what they value, together with differentiation. Segmentation is a market side, a demand side characteristic. Differentiation is what we do to products and services to respond to those differences. There's a big debate about going global and whether you want to be standardized or customized. And yes, it is important to try to customize for local markets. Standardization often gives you lower costs. You do the same thing everywhere. It's lower cost. Get consistency in terms of message. So there are some advantages to being standardized. The problem is that it doesn't work in all markets, but it does work in some. There are certain products that have universal acceptance across cultures. Don't have to do much modification, if any. Music. Lady Gaga is popular in lots of places, and she's not customizing her music for China versus Europe versus the United States. In fact, there are a lot of markets that are characterized by consumption of culture. They typically tend to be markets made up of young, educated adults. Young, educated, college-educated adults tend to have a lot of very similar cultural differences across the world. And so the same product works in those cases. Motion pictures. The majority of the profits of most of the production companies here in Los Angeles don't grow from the United States. They grow from sales in other countries. But there are problems with standardization. Standardization often ignores the customer, or at least customer differences. When Subway went into China, it went in with the same offerings of products that it offered in the United States, and offered very successfully in the United States. It was rejected completely in China. And the reason for that was the Chinese actually like hot food. Subway products for years were only cold. So the Chinese didn't like it. Subway has subsequently changed its menu even in the U.S. to offer some hot offerings. But the Chinese didn't like cold food, and the product that was offered was not a particularly successful product. In contrast, Starbucks did very well when it went to China. Because there was a long history of tea houses in China where people would congregate. People don't entertain in their homes because homes tend to be rather small. They still like to get together and talk and visit, but they would do that in tea houses. Well, they now do that at tea houses and at Starbucks. Starbucks has become a major meeting gathering. So it fit very well into that local customer base. But if you ignore local differences that are important, as Subway did, you're really ignoring an important characteristic of the market, or that segment of the market. Standardization often centralizes decision making, and often there's a need to make decisions at the local level because there may be a need for customization, there may be a need to understand the local customer, to make adjustments to that customer. And it might not even be at the level of the customer need. It might actually be related to how distribution channels work. We have great big mega stores in the United States. Walmart's, Sam's Club, Costco. And yeah, they've had some success internationally, but in a lot of places they have failed. Because a lot of customers don't trust the big mega stores. How could you possibly have anything of quality when you're dealing with that much merchandise at one time? I want to deal with my neighbor who runs a little small shop. I trust them. Well, if that's the nature of the distribution channel, then we have to adjust to that. And that may require some local decision making and decision makers who really understand the nature of distribution channels. But if you're going to pursue a strategy that involves multiple products, then it becomes important to kind of understand where there might be opportunities for some standardization that would provide economies of scale, economies of scope, while still providing an opportunity for some customization to serve market segments. So one way to think about this is, if you look out at the segments in the marketplace, is there something that they have in common? But whatever they might have in common, we could refer to as the core product or platform. So we look at all the features that we might offer, all the services, shopping preferences, add-ons, some of which would be preferred by some segments, not others. But is there something that's shared? So, for example, for automobiles, all automobiles are built on a chassis. Chassis is just kind of a carriage on which everything else sits. By the way, you don't even see it. The only way you can see it is you put the car up on a rack and look up. And it's a very important characteristic of a product. It's a platform. And most automobile companies actually build their products on a relatively small number of platforms. And they get economies of scale as a result. And then what they do is they differentiate by building something different on top. Different shape, different number of doors, different colors, different motor, but all on the same chassis. In fact, here's how it would work. Here's a common platform. I find it particular elements that are required by, valued by, necessary to every product. And then what I do is that on that common platform, I differentiate in some way. I create a product with different features that are valued by a particular segment. And then I have another product, again, built on the same platform, so I'm getting economies of scale, but differentiated in some other way. Maybe this is a 2-door car, maybe this is a 4-door car. But now those features are designed to appeal to a second segment. Now I can do this with a third segment. What I don't want to do is to have 3 products or more products built on the common platform that are all intended for exactly the same segment. Because all I'm going to do is I'm going to incur the cost of creating 3 different products to appeal to a single segment. I really want a unique product that's well suited for an individual segment that's built on a common platform. If I can do that, I can get economies of scale, and I can also get differentiation. Let's skip over that. There is some work that's been done on the relationship of marketing strategy and profitability. This was actually begun by General Electric in the 1950s. It's still going on today. It's called the profit impact of marketing strategy, or you'll sometimes hear people talk about PIMS, first letter of each word, profit impact of marketing strategy. It's a really interesting work. There's a consulting firm now that manages the data. You can go and hire them. They'll come in and consult, look at their database, compare your company to their database, and make recommendations. But it had its origins at General Electric, and General Electric said, surely there must be things that we can learn that are common across businesses. Surely not every business is unique, and indeed they're not. There are things that are clearly common with respect to what works and what does not work. What PIMS consists of is a database that includes about 450 firms, mostly U.S. firms, in large, mature manufacturing businesses, so there's a caveat there. It's a type of business. But it also includes about 3,000 separate business units. When we looked at General Electric, for example, General Electric is not really one company. It's a bunch of different business units. Jet engines, railroad engines, imaging, consumer credit. The whole notion here is that if we could pool a lot of experience, pool a lot of information, that we could figure out what works and what doesn't work, and more importantly, what works for particular types of companies and what doesn't work for those same types of companies. So we're kind of looking for the universal laws of strategy, that they exist. So they collect a lot of data every year, still collected every year today. A lot of information on financial performance, return on investment, return on sales, long-term value enhancement, things like investment in R&D. They collect information on market conditions, what's happening in the general economy, competitive position of the firm, strategy of the firm, just a lot of information. There's a big, long questionnaire that goes out to firms every year. So we've got this tremendous database. And I'm going to show you some of the findings in the database in a moment. But before I do, I do want you to understand the limitations of the data. It's great data, but it has limitations. First of all, if you look at the data, what you'll find is that there is evidence of kind of popular management trends in the data. So you'll look at particular points in time, you'll find investments in re-engineering, find investments in total quality, you'll find investments in whatever the popular fad is at a particular point in time. Some of the measures are very subjective. Some of the terms, so for example, market share. Not every firm defines market and market share exactly the same way. We talked about that earlier in the course, that you could talk about it, or you could talk about the soft drink market. Those are both equally valid ways to think about a market, but they are different. There are differences in how the firms do their accounting, and there's a real focus on what you can measure. There are a lot of things that are not measurable, so we don't catch those. This is just data that has been collected. There's no way to go outside the data and validate it. We have to just take the data at its face. And certainly the data are bound by time and space. Type of firm that's represented, the type of market that's represented. Facebook is not in this. But the PIMS results have been very robust for decades. And I'm going to talk about a few of the things, the general wisdom that comes out of PIMS. We'll talk about the importance of market share, about what we know about quality, about what the data tell us about advertising and pricing, what it tells us about investment intensity, and we'll also talk a little bit about what it says about loyalty and about responsiveness to the marketplace. This is what the data show about the relationship between market share and return on investment. By the way, this is not market share for any individual product. This is total market share. So this large market share might represent 21 different brands of detergent. But what we find is that there is a very strong link within a marketplace between profitability as measured by return on investment and total market share. In fact, the data suggests that having 5 times the market share of a competitor equals 3 times the profitability of that same competitor. And we found that to be a very robust finding, which is one of the reasons why you'll hear so many senior managers talk about we've got to capture market share. They often don't understand why. but they've learned somewhere that market share seems to matter. By the way, not all high market share firms show this type of profitability. Again, it's about execution. But in general, if you're executing well, higher market share should make you more profitable. And it makes sense because you're getting economies of scale, which allows you to lower your costs. If you're capturing more of the marketplace with products that are a really good match for customer segments, that should be paying a higher premium. So it really makes logical sense, but it has to be executed well. Here's the role of quality that we see reflected in the data. Turns out a little bit of quality improvement doesn't help. If you're going to do quality improvement, you sort of have to go all in. A little bit doesn't buy you very much. But as you begin to improve quality beyond some threshold, what we tend to see is that profitability tends to increase as quality goes up. There was a great debate for probably 20 years about whether it was worth investing in quality because quality was perceived to be a cost. And there is a cost associated with quality, but it also turns out that people will pay a premium for high quality. So investing in quality actually generates significant returns, provided you invest in it. By the way, we find the same thing for marketing. A little bit of marketing doesn't get you much. You kind of have to go all in. High quality associated with high share, or vice versa, tends to produce the highest profits. So if I've got a high share, meaning I'm capturing a lot of the market, but probably doing so because I'm serving several different segments well, and I'm doing that with quality as assessed by the marketplace, I'm going to get high profitability. Low share in high quality or high share in low quality sort of give you middling returns. The lesson here is simply that higher quality, and again, quality defined as the customer would define quality, tends to drive costs lower. They tend to increase market share, and they tend to increase margins. So we really don't do quality just for the sake of quality. There's a real financial return associated with doing quality well. Here's what the data look like, and I can show you more. This is old data, but it's old data on purpose. I can't show you current data. If you want current data, they will be happy to show it to you for $1 million. That's their business model. But here's a relationship between profitability, that's what those numbers are, and product quality and market share. So what we find is that low product quality, low market share have an average profitability of 8%. On the other hand, high quality, high market share, average profitability about 31%. By the way, the more recent data, this number has gotten lower and this number has gotten higher. So if you've got high quality, you want to try to leverage it with market share. If you've got high market share, you want to be sure you've got a high quality product in all of the markets you're serving. Ultimately, value to the customer is the driver of profits. So in contrast to what Porter says about strategy, it's not the ability to create barriers to keep competitors out. It's the ability to create value that customers want and will pay for. So higher market share, higher profitability, produces higher quality at a lower cost, and that's the key to profitability. PIMS also teaches us some things about advertising and pricing. If you have a low price and low quality, don't tell anybody about it. They'll if they're interested in a low-cost product, they'll find it on their own. The price-sensitive part of the market will go find a low price. You don't need to tell them about it. On the other hand, if you've got a higher priced product that's higher in quality, that's where you ought to spend your advertising dollars. Explain to people why the product or service is of high quality and why that they should pay that premium. This is where the advertising dollars return. We also know that there are some businesses that require a lot of investment. Building or creating, manufacturing integrated circuits, computer chips, is done with fabrication plants, IC fabrication plants. Anybody know what the cost of building a new IC fabrication plant is these days? It's about $8 billion. It's a lot of money. By the way, if you're going to put $8 billion into a factory, you got to sell a lot of chips to make money. You got to have really sizable margins to make money. On the other hand, what does it cost to build an app? Any app on your phone, what's it cost? Yeah.
Isn't it like over $1 million?
No. Hey, you could spend over $1 million, but a lot of apps have been built in people's spare time in their garage. Doesn't cost very much at all, actually. You do a little bit of coding, you need some time, but a lot of apps, and this is why you can buy apps off of Google Play or the Apple Store for 99 cents, because it's really cheap to create them. Well, given that, it's really easy to get a nice return on an app. I haven't put much investment into it, and yeah, they sell it for 99 cents, but 50 cents of that could be my profit margin. And so if I sell enough of those, I could make a nice business. The implication of that, though, is that really investment-intensive businesses tend to have lower returns on investment. If I have to put a lot of money up front, I tend to have a lower return than if I have a business where I don't have to put a lot up front. Now, the good news for those businesses where you have to put a lot up front is that discourages competition. There are not a lot of companies that can put $8 billion into the construction of a fab plant. Intel can do it. Apple does it now. AMD does it. Samsung does it. We're kind of running out of competitors. So that gives you some, if you can get into that business, it gives you some protection from competition just by virtue of firms not having the ability to get into the business because of the resources required. But it's going to take you a long time to get that return back. Whereas a lot of businesses in today's information technology world really don't require much in the way of a startup at all. What did it cost to create Facebook? It started out as a dating app in a dorm room. It didn't cost much. What did it cost to start Amazon? Needed a website and access to distributors of books. In fact, Amazon really early on was in the drop shipment business. Everybody knows what drop shipments are? Yeah. I mean, they were basically order takers and send the order to the book manufacturers, the book publishers, who would then send the book to the customer. Not much expense there at all. One of the things that customers value is responsiveness. And so one of the things that the PIMS data show us is that, first of all, product life cycles are getting shorter. You know, the time between models, if you will, has tended to get shorter and shorter. I mean, look at a product or a company like Apple. How often does Apple now bring out new products? Brings out new phones. These days they're bringing out a new phone model about once a year. It used to be every 2 years. Before that it was every 3 years. But they've gotten faster and faster in response to changes in the marketplace. Part of that is in response to competitors. Part of that is simply in response to the fact that people want the new, latest and greatest. Why would I want that phone? It's a year old. I want the latest one. So we're getting shorter product life cycles. You will often see particularly for technology companies, and here I don't mean just information technology, it could be pharmaceuticals as well. You will see them report what percentage of their profits come from new products, or what percentage of profits are coming from products introduced in the last year, or the last 2 years, or the last 3 years. We refer to these as vintage tables. And what you'll see in most of those companies, the more recently introduced products are the ones producing the greatest profits. Generally, yeah.
Sorry. I've been doing a lot of research for another class on sustainable products and their product life cycles and how people or manufacturers are creating more sustainable ones to last longer. So how would that affect, because it's a shorter product life cycle, so how would that affect companies' profits and stuff like that if it's longer, way longer product life cycles kind of?
Well, it depends. First of all, it would depend on the industry. But the short answer to that is it will reduce profits.
Okay.
I mean, it will, because you're basically taking people out of the market for a longer period of time.
Right.
And we're going to talk a little bit about sustainability in a week. But one of the issues around sustainability is the trade-offs that are involved, and how much are you willing to trade off? So if I were to make a product that would last your lifetime, or maybe your lifetime and your children's lifetime, and I take you completely out of the market for the rest of your life and your children's lives, how does that ripple through to the economy? You know, lots of sales that might have occurred don't now occur. The jobs that would have facilitated those sales aren't present. And so it's a really delicate balance. And I'm a big believer in sustainability, but it needs to be weighed against what are the other economic costs, certainly in the short term. You know, we're going to stop burning fossil fuels at some point. I mean, I don't have any doubt about that. The only question is how soon and what pain we impose in order to make that happen. My sense is that the market will eventually fix that problem, because long term, I think renewable energy sources are going to be less expensive than fossil fuels. And so why would people pay more? And so I think the market generally will take care of itself. But there are people who want to impose short-term solutions that involve really quite dramatic other costs. And so it's important to think through those. And actually next Monday we'll talk a little bit about those things. Yeah.
Do you think there's a point when manipulating product life cycle gets unethical? For example, light bulbs. If you could produce a light bulb for $6, that would last you 8 years. But a company sells you
I do think that there's some degree of unethicality associated with that. Yeah. On the other hand, it's also important to recognize that consumers often want something new. They probably don't care about light bulbs. I mean, the fact that my light bulb is a year old probably doesn't matter much to me, as long as it's burning. But for other things, being new, being the latest, having the best features, and that has value, and people are interested in buying them. But again, a lot of profitability comes out of new products. And the reason for that is simply that people like the new benefits that are provided. Another driver of shorter life cycles is just competition in growth markets. Competitors compete in part by trying to one-up competitors. They develop high quality, different features, faster devices, all kinds of ways in which they may differentiate. But as soon as you have a much faster mobile telephone, and people realize that it's much faster, many of them want that much faster device. Distribution channels also come into play. Distributors like to have the latest and greatest. Why? Because it attracts people to the distributor. And being able to respond to a distributor's requests quickly gives you a leg up on competition. And finally, the ability to be nimble and respond to the market quickly often reduces your dependence on long-range forecasts. If I don't have to build a lot of inventory and store it in order to meet unexpected demand, if I can create a product as demand arrives, I can take a lot of my inventory carrying risks away. That's what just-in-time manufacturing is about. And quite literally, if you look at modern automobile production facilities, the suppliers, in most cases, are literally at the production line. So they're providing parts, supplies, literally as the car is being manufactured. In fact, they're doing their manufacture on site. So we've suddenly gotten rid of a lot of the costs of carrying inventory. I remember, a number of years now, I was spending some time with General Motors, and I had a warehouse manager take me on a tour, and we went into this gigantic facility, the size of a covered stadium, and in it were automobile air conditioners, just as far as the eye could see. And he was so proud of his inventory system and his ability to take care of that inventory. And I just looked at it and saw dollar signs. Why would you carry all of that? Well, at the time I had to, but it really represented a lot of costs sitting idle, investment sitting idle. Also involved a lot of risk, because what happens if at some point all those things that they manufacture are superseded by a new technology, or the government outlaws them because of the way they're manufactured. So the more responsive I can be to the market, the faster I can respond to the market, the less I have to be concerned about really long-term forecasts about product demand. I still need to think about long-term, particularly long-term changes in the market, but I don't have to be so concerned about my ability to actually have product available. There are, in fact, high returns to speed. People will pay a premium to get things quickly. You want it next week? Fine, free shipping. You want it tomorrow? Oh, that'll be $20. But I want it now. In fact, Best Buy has become very successful in competing against Amazon by allowing you to order online and then go to the store and pick up the product. You can actually get the product faster than Amazon can ship it to you. Because people value responsiveness. There's certain products where people want it today. By the way, if you can provide it now and a competitor can't, that reduces competitive pressure. Also means that I have to do fewer markdowns. Because if I can get to the market with the right product quickly, then I'm not going to end up with a lot of inventory that I have to mark down at the end of the season. And I get a lot of cost savings. I get smaller inventories, fewer stockouts, just a lot of reasons. If I can be nimble enough to respond quickly to changes in the marketplace. And as we've already seen in earlier discussions in class, there are big returns on loyalty and retention. That's why we do brand building. We're trying to create loyalty. People coming back and purchasing over and over again. Generally purchasing at a premium relative to generic product. Satisfaction, loyalty, retention, there are big returns on that. And we saw that in the earlier class. The PIMS data simply reinforce that. And what we're really talking about here are relationships. And relationships are not just between a seller and a buyer. Relationships extend all the way through the value chain. So a supplier, a manufacturer, a distributor, the end customer, all of those involve relationships. And to the extent that they work well, they tend to be associated with profitability. So there's some known bases for strategic success. They don't always hold. There are differences in markets, there are differences in terms, and things do change over time. But in general, there are some things that seem to work in terms of success. So let me talk about the role of marketing in the firm in the time we have remaining. Peter Drucker says the purpose of a business is to create a customer. I'm a firm believer in that. Businesses don't survive very long without customers. He says because the purpose of a business is to create a customer, the business enterprise has two, and only two basic functions, marketing and innovation. Innovation may be R&D, it may be innovation with respect to business models, but it's creating something new. He says marketing and innovation produce results. All the rest are costs. And I believe that. So marketing is the distinguishing, unique function of business. However, I also believe David Packard when he says marketing is too important to be left to the marketing people. Why would David Packard, one of the founders of Hewlett Packard, think that marketing is too important to be left to the marketing people? Well, if you really believe that marketing and innovation are the essential features of a business, you probably don't want to delegate those things. You probably want those things looked at by senior management. They're fundamental to the business. So yeah, there's a role for the marketing people who do the marketing things. But ultimately, the creation of a customer, creation of innovative new ideas really needs to be driven from the top of the organization. So what we've talked about thus far in this course is that marketing strategy ultimately needs to produce financial results. But in order to be successful, you need information. In your bike's simulation, you had lots of information about markets. You need to do analyses. And by the way, information and data are not the same as an analysis. People can start with very similar data and end up with completely different ideas about how to proceed. So the analysis is really a part of turning the information into something of value that has direction. And that, by the way, involves creativity. Data rarely suggests precisely what you should do. Part of what I like about marketing is, yeah, there's a very strong analytic component, but there's a very strong creative component. And then, once you've got an idea, you've got to have the competence in the organization, either current competence or you need to go get the competence in order to execute and then to follow through. Which leads us to a discussion of something that's come to be called market-based assets and the relationship of those assets to financial performance. So there are all kinds of market-based assets. They tend to be intangible. Brands, the install base, who you're selling product to now. I mean, these represent kind of customer relationships. There are partner relationships, partnerships with channels of distribution. There may be co-branding relationships. There may be networks that you're involved in. Those market-based assets give you the opportunity to perform in the marketplace. You can get faster, into the market faster. Faster trials, faster referrals, faster adoption. I may be able to get a price premium. I may be able to get a larger share of the market. There may be extensions of current offerings that I can identify. I may be able to lower sales and service costs. I may have loyalty and retention that reduce my marketing costs and my costs of finding customers. And those market things that I do in terms of market performance ultimately create shareholder value. They can accelerate cash flows, make them larger, can often reduce the volatility of cash flows over time, and ultimately enhance the residual value of those cash flows. So there's a very clear link between what we do in marketing and what happens on the financial side of the firm. And part of what I tried to do with you this semester is to help you tell that story. Because if you can't tell the story, you can't do the analysis. If you can tell the story, then you can start doing some analyses and putting numbers to the story. But until you can tell the story, you can't work the numbers.